to everyone for coming out tonight, and thanks to the Commodore and all the flag officers. This presentation is actually about the making of this book, and there are some copies here as well, which I can sign later and put any happy messages you like in it. It's a voyage we made in 2008-2009, and over this evening we're going to be sailing. We actually left Butlers Hard, but we're going to pick the story up in Falmouth, sail from Falmouth to Lisbon, and then from Lisbon to Gibraltar, Cagliari in Sardinia, Argento in Sicily and on to Malta, and then from Malta to Brevisa, through the Corinth Canal to Athens, over into Turkey, Izmir, and then up through the Dardanelles to Istanbul, and then back much more directly from Istanbul to Malta. We do this together. This is Gillian. Unfortunately, she's not here tonight because it's the Bewley Village Christmas bun fight, and so she's there selling raffle tickets. But she says hello. But we work as a team. We do the research together, and then she does the photographs and videos, and I write the words. And this is our good friend Vasco da Gama, our home study, library and wine cellar. And this was taken in Kasterizon in Greece. On this adventure, we two were in pursuit of these two. On the left is Lord Byron, and on the right his diarist and best friend John Cam Hobhouse. And we were following them when they were both 21, and before they really both became famous, around the Mediterranean on their grand tour. They travelled mostly on one of these. This is a packet ship, and packets were very much the Pony Express of the empire. The word derived from the French paquet, and packets of post. We call it post, by the way, because in those days it was only post delivery that all the charges could be worked out. So we get post office, penny post, etc. from that. They were very uncomfortable forms of travel. They were really just meant for cargo, diplomatic bags and mail. But VIPs like Byron could buy the captain's cabin. And the captains were really badly paid. So captains like John Bull, they really relied on renting their cabins out to make a living. And lastly, by way of introduction, I'd just like to mention the sort of geopolitical situation in 1809, 1811. Europe was at the height of the Napoleonic Wars. And briefly, Napoleon and... my gadget stopped working. Napoleon and his allies controlled pretty much all of the continent. The Royal Navy under Nelson controlled pretty much all of the seas, certainly all the Western Med and most of the Eastern Med. The other major player is the Ottomans, and the Ottoman Empire stretched from that line there, more or less, right the way down to Egypt, right off the map, all of North Africa. So the Ottoman Empire was actually a lot bigger than the French Empire, and it is in the Ottoman Empire that the majority of this story happens. We set off, as I said, in 2008 and 9, and the idea was that this book would come out for the 200th anniversary, which it did. It was quite a big step for us to leave. This is the day we left at Butlers Hard, and as we left, Gillian made rather a plaintive cry to the shore.
Goodbye, England!
I, on the other hand, was feeling slightly more rumbustrous about leaving. It was indeed at the height of the Brown Darling terror. But off we set. So we're going to pick the story up in Falmouth. People used to leave from Falmouth rather than London because in those days, sailing ships being what they were, it was a rather awkward trip up an uncooperative channel. So it's much quicker for passengers and light cargo, like post, to get the coach and horse up to down to Falmouth. Secondly, around, this thing's on the blink, but I'm sure everyone in this audience knows where the Brest Peninsula is without this thing shining on it. But there, it is working. It was a hive for French privateers, so it was necessary to give the Brest Peninsula a wide berth. And lastly, as we all know, the Bay of Biscay can be very bad-tempered, so it was, again, a good idea to stay out deep. So all the ships did stay out deep. When Byron left, he left with his famous entourage, which was a bit of a movable feast, was running joke throughout the book. But as he left, he had with him his best friend and diarist John Cam Hobhurst, his page boy, and Byron was always very partial to a page boy. His valet, who stayed with him throughout the expedition, his butler, the old family retainer, they weren't quite sure where they were going at first. It was generally the East, the Orient, India, so they took along a Farsi translator. He had no less than, well, he had a campaign desk and library, no less than 8 portmanteaus full of all his clothes and uniforms and more books. I haven't got room on there to put the 2 army beds, the 2 saddles and stands. You could say he was the opposite of a Ryanair passenger. But he set off, and like Byron, we set off in the middle of June to time it so we had a full moon halfway. We thought we were doing everything right. We took great care of the weather forecast, but we had a really bad passage down, one storm after another. And this is from Gillian's blog.
Between midday yesterday and 4 o'clock this morning, we came through a horrendous patch of rough sea. I spent the storm in our cabin, working on some counted cross-stitch embroidery to keep my mind off the towering waves and crashing waves. I was excused watch duty as it was stormy, foggy, and we were in a busy shipping lane in the English Channel.
Well, we didn't have any option but to press on. This was taken a couple of days later. You can see we got terrific northerly wind and we were flying down the Portuguese coast. But it didn't really get much better. This is from a slightly later blog.
At about 6 p.m, I emerged to make some sandwiches as it was too rough to heat up the shepherd's pie I had made in Falmouth. On my way back into the cabin, a huge wave broke over the boat, covering the boat and me and filling the aft cabin with water. Fortunately, the bed was covered with a sheepskin cover which trapped the water in a puddle, and I was able to empty it, change my clothes, and get into a dry bed for the night.
As we were coming into Cascais, which is the entrance into Lisbon, some people were walking along the path with a good camera, and it turned out that they were our neighbours in the marina. So we actually managed to get ourselves photographs of ourselves in action, which is quite rare. So you can see we're pretty heavily reefed and flying along. There we go. So now we're going to concentrate on Byron's part of the story for a while. He made this part of the journey overland, and we're now skirting around the Peninsular War. This was a subsect of the Napoleonic Wars, where the French had double-crossed the Spanish by promising Portugal, or half of Portugal, and the Spanish, for a change, joined forces with us and the Portuguese against the French. So I'm not going to spend much time on this tonight, but there are a couple of instances which are quite amusing. First of all, Sevilla was the Allied headquarters, and this is the house where Byron stayed. Because it was Allied headquarters, there weren't very many places to stay. And he stayed in this house, which is right near to the centre, but now condemned, I feel. And he stayed with a couple of young ladies and wrote as follows.
We lodged in the house of 2 unmarried Spanish ladies. The eldest honoured your unworthy son with very particular attention, embracing him with great tenderness at parting, after cutting off a lock of his hair and presenting him with one of her own. Her last words to me were, "Adieu, you pretty fellow, you please me much." She offered me a share of her apartment, which my virtue induced me to decline.
Well, I got to know young Byron very well over these 2 years, and his reticence is very unlikely, but this was a letter to his mother.